Rena stared at the stack of papers on her desk. Most of them were old articles she had collected over the past few weeks. Every story had the same common thread: Hollow Grave Medical Center, an abandoned hospital left to decay since 1987. Tales about the place had always fascinated the public, from rumors of patients mysteriously disappearing to the hospital's sudden closure without any clear reason. However, the most frequently told story was about Silas Vane, a surgeon who was said to have lost his sanity and conducted horrifying experiments on his patients before vanishing without a trace. Rena smiled faintly as she packed the documents into her backpack. Tonight, she would investigate the place herself with three of her friends, Fiend, Ninda, and Aldo. She had prepared everything: camera, flashlight, voice recorder, and even a rough map of the hospital she had found in one of the old articles. The journey began at Rena's small apartment, where they gathered. Aldo, their newest friend with experience as an urban legend hunter, arrived early, carrying a large bag filled with what he called essential tools for an exploration like this. Asterisk, the hospital is out of town, far from any crowds. We'll be taking a narrow road that can only be accessed by car. Asterisk, he said, holding up a map. Asterisk, how do you even know the way? Asterisk, Fiend asked. Asterisk, trust me, I've done my research. Besides, this isn't my first time entering a haunted place. Asterisk, Aldo replied with a confident smile. Rena simply nodded. She knew the risks, but her curiosity was too strong. She didn't just want to confirm the existence of the terrifying stories. She wanted to find something that could be a major discovery. Once they were all ready, they got into the car and began their journey. The road to the hospital felt like a passage into another world. The bright, lively city gradually faded into the eerie silence of the night. Street lights became scarce, replaced by towering trees lining both sides of the road. The sound of other vehicles slowly disappeared, leaving only the hum of their car engine breaking the quiet. Aldo sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel with focus. Rena was beside him, checking the camera and voice recorder in her lap. In the back seat, Fiend and Ninda whispered jokes to ease a growing tension in the air. Asterisk, are you sure this is the right way? Asterisk, Rena asked, breaking the silence. Her gaze fixed on the narrow road ahead, which was getting darker and harder to see. Aldo nodded. Asterisk, I'm sure. The hospital is near a small forest, far from any residential areas. Apparently, they built it there so patients could rest without disturbances from the outside world. Asterisk, asterisk, rest. Also, no one could hear them scream. Asterisk, Fiend muttered from the back, half joking, but his words made Rena shudder. When the car finally stopped, they found themselves in front of a large, decaying gate. The rusted iron bars were wrapped in a thick chain that looked untouched for years. Beyond the gate, the old hospital towered over them like a forgotten giant. Its walls were covered in moss and overgrown vines, while its windows stared back at them like hollow, empty eyes. Rena stepped out of the car, feeling the cold night air brush against her face. There was a distinct smell in the air, a mix of dust, damp earth, and something stranger, like a faint scent of metal. Asterisk, we're here, Asterisk, Aldo said, opening his bag and pulling out a small bolt cutter. Asterisk, ready? Asterisk. Rena only nodded as Fiend and Ninda stepped out hesitantly. Deep inside, Rena felt something was wrong. This place felt off, but she ignored the feeling. They had come this far, and she wasn't about to turn back. Aldo started cutting through the chain, the metallic clanking echoing through the silent night. After a few minutes, the chain snapped, falling to the ground with a heavy thud. Aldo pushed the old gate open, and its rusty hinges groaned, the sound piercing the still air like a drawn-out scream. Asterisk, here we go, Asterisk, Aldo whispered, switching on his flashlight. Rena was the first to step through the gate, entering the hospital grounds. Behind her, her friends followed cautiously. Wild grass reached up to their knees, hiding shards of broken glass and splintered wood. In the distance, the hospital looked even larger than Rena had imagined. But something felt even stranger. The night was still. She had the unsettling sensation that something was moving among the trees surrounding them. Asterisk, hurry up, asterisk, Aldo said, his voice more serious now. He seemed uneasy, different from his usual confident self. They approached the main entrance, but just as Rena had expected, the door was locked. She shined her flashlight around and spotted a broken window on the right side of the building, almost as if inviting them inside. Asterisk over here. Asterisk, she said, pointing at the window. One by one, they climbed through, and as Rena stepped inside, an icy chill wrapped around her body. The smell of dampness and decay filled the air, mixing with the thick dust that clung to everything. The ceiling was covered in cobwebs, and deep cracks ran along the walls. Asterisk, this place looks like it's been abandoned for 100 years. Asterisk, she murmured. But in the midst of the darkness and silence, Rena had the strangest feeling. Something was watching them. And for a brief moment, she wanted to turn around and leave. But she knew there was no turning back now. As her foot touched the cracked floor inside the building, Rena felt the atmosphere shift completely. The air inside the abandoned hospital was heavy, almost pressing against her chest. The smell of dampness mixed with something rotten, as if something had been decaying for years in the hidden corners of the building. The beam of her flashlight illuminated what was once the hospital's main lobby. Traces of the past were still evident: an overturned reception desk, shattered wooden chairs, and a bulletin board covered in a thick layer of dust, its faded notices barely legible. Behind her, Fiend, Ninda, and Aldo took turns climbing through the broken window. They stood still for a moment, letting their eyes adjust to the suffocating darkness around them. This is bigger than I imagined, Rena murmured to herself, shining her flashlight toward the high ceiling. Cracks and water stains covered the walls, forming eerie patterns that looked like faint faces among the shadows. Aldo unfolded the worn-out hospital map under the dim flashlight and pointed at a section. According to this, he said, the first floor has a reception area, the emergency unit, and some administrative offices. If we want to get to room 405, we need to go up to the fourth floor, but we can also look around here first. Rena nodded, her eyes fixed on the dark corridor stretching ahead. Let's look for clues first. Anything that can tell us what happened in this place. Fiend turned on his camera, beginning the recording. The camera lens followed the flashlight's beam, capturing every corner of the room. I just hope we don't find anything too real, he muttered, his voice trembling slightly despite his attempt to hide it. They started walking down the main corridor, their footsteps echoing across the empty concrete floor. Each step felt heavier, as if the building itself was trying to hold them back. Rena led the way, followed by Fiend with his camera, and Aldo and Ninda at the back. Rena shone her flashlight on one of the doors that was still standing firm despite its peeling paint and barely visible room number. Above the door, a small sign read Medical Records. Let's check this one, she said, reaching for the handle. She pulled it slowly, and a long, creaking sound echoed through the corridor, sending chills down their spines. The room was small, filled with filing cabinets, most of which were already damaged. Papers were scattered across the floor, many of them ruined by moisture and time. Rena picked up one of the few intact sheets and tried to read it under the flashlight. However, the text was too faded. Only a few words were still legible. Asterisk, asterisk, patient name, critical condition, Dr. Silas Vane. Dr. Silas Vane, Rena murmured. His name keeps coming up in every story about this place. Fiend brought his camera closer, recording the paper. If he really existed, what made him so terrifying that people still talk about him? Because they say he did something inhuman, Aldo answered while checking another filing cabinet. Medical experiments that crossed ethical boundaries. Some even believe he locked patients in the basement to use them as test subjects. Rena tightened her grip on the paper, imagining what might have happened in this place years ago. But her thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound, like footsteps coming from outside the room. They all froze. Did you hear that? Ninda whispered. Rena nodded slowly, shining her flashlight toward the open door. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped just outside. They held their breath, waiting. Nothing. But when Rena finally gathered the courage to step out and shine her light down the corridor, a chill ran down her spine. At the far end of the hallway, she saw something that shouldn't be there. A shadow moving quickly, disappearing around the corner. "There's something there," she said, turning to her friends. "Don't start acting weird." "Rena," Fiend said, though his voice sounded increasingly uneasy. "No, I'm serious." "Something moved at the end of the hall," Rena insisted. "We need to check it out." They continued forward, this time moving more cautiously. The corridor stretched on, growing darker, as if it had no end. Rena kept leading, though the unease in her chest was growing stronger. When they reached the corner, they found something that made them all stop in their tracks. A large door stood before them, with a sign above it that read operating room. But the strangest thing was a message written in what looked like dried blood on the door. "Do not enter room 405. 405 again," Aldo murmured, eyes widening as he stared at the message. "Why does that room keep coming up?" Ninda asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Rena said, shining her flashlight over the door. "But we need to find it." At that moment, Rena's flashlight flickered before going out completely. Then the others' flashlights died as well. They were plunged into total darkness, and in the silence that followed, they heard something that would haunt them forever. Heavy footsteps, slowly approaching from behind. Rena turned quickly, but she couldn't see anything. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice trembling. No response, but the sound kept getting closer, and for the first time, Rena felt certain they were not alone in this building. The footsteps echoed against the empty concrete floor, cutting through the silence like a knife. Rena's breath caught in her throat. The darkness wrapped around them like a suffocating blanket. She tried to turn her flashlight back on, but the switch wouldn't respond. Neither did the others. "Aldo, do you have spare batteries?" Rena whispered. "They should be in my bag," Aldo answered, his voice tense. He quickly reached into his backpack, but his frustration grew when he couldn't find what he was looking for. "This doesn't make sense. The batteries were here before we entered." They stood there in heavy silence, accompanied only by the sound of those footsteps, now stopped. Right behind them. "You all heard that, right?" Ninda whispered, barely audible. Her voice was filled with fear, and Rena could hear it trembling. Rena slowly turned, trying to see something in the darkness. But there was nothing, only an empty void, only their unsteady breathing. But then another sound started, not footsteps, a whisper. The whisper was low, as if it came from many voices speaking at once. It was unclear what they were saying, but the tone felt angry, full of hatred. The words seemed to pierce the ears, even though none of them could be understood. "We have to get out of here," Fiend said in a panicked voice. "Right now." But before Rena could respond, the sound of footsteps suddenly returned, this time from in front of them. The steps were faster, heavier, like someone running toward them. "Run!" Rena screamed, grabbing Ninda's hand. Without a second thought, they all ran down the dark corridor. Rena could hear the heavy breathing of her friends behind her, but the sound of the other footsteps did not stop. Whatever was chasing them was also picking up speed. The corridor felt endless. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew colder, making each breath painful. Rena knew they couldn't keep running like this, but stopping wasn't an option. "This way," Aldo shouted, pointing to a door on their right. Without hesitation, they pushed the door open together and rushed into a small room that appeared to be an abandoned nurse's office. Aldo immediately shut the door behind them, pressing his body against it as if trying to block anything from entering. The room was cramped, containing only a few broken wooden chairs and an old hospital bed in the corner. The walls were covered in dark stains that couldn't be explained, and the stench inside was even worse than in the corridor. Rena tried to steady her breathing as she shone her phone's flashlight around. The weak light was enough to reveal the room's awful condition. On one of the walls, large words were written in red paint, so dark it almost looked like blood. "They will not let you leave." "What does this mean?" Ninda whispered, her voice trembling. She stood in the corner of the room, her body shaking. "This isn't funny anymore," Fiend muttered, sliding down to the floor. "Whatever this is, we shouldn't be here. We have to get out of this building." Rena didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the writing, trying to make sense of it. But her thoughts were interrupted by another sound, this time closer. It was the sound of something heavy being dragged outside the room. "Is it getting closer?" Aldo whispered, still leaning against the door. The sound grew louder, like metal scraping against the floor. Rena tried to peek through the small gap in the door, but the corridor was too dark to see anything. "Whatever it is, we can't stay here too long," she finally said. "If we stay, we'll be trapped. And where exactly are we supposed to go?" Fiend asked, frustrated. "This place is a maze. We don't even know where the exit is." Rena thought hard. This hospital felt like a trap, but they couldn't let fear stop them. "We need to get to the fourth floor. Room 405. Everything points to it. Maybe we'll find something there, maybe even a way out." "Are you serious, Rena?" Aldo looked at her sharply. "We don't even know what's inside that room. It could be a trap, but it's the only lead we have," Rena said firmly. "Are we just going to hide here until whatever it is finds us?" Aldo hesitated, then finally nodded. "All right, but we have to move now." They carefully stepped out of the room. The corridor was silent again, but the feeling of being watched lingered in the air. Their steps were slow, almost soundless. Rena led the way with her phone, their only source of light. As they passed an open room, she caught a glimpse of something that made her heart stop. A shadow standing in the middle of the room, its figure unclear, but its eyes glowing red like embers. But when she turned her phone to shine the light on it, the room was empty. "What did you see?" Fiend asked from behind her, his voice filled with unease. "Nothing, nothing," Rena said, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. She didn't want to make them panic even more. The journey to the stairs felt like a nightmare. Every step took them deeper into the darkness, and the faint whispers continued to follow them. When they finally reached the stairwell, Rena felt a small sense of relief, but only for a moment. The stairs were covered in dark stains that looked like burn marks, and the stench in the air was overpowering. "Hurry," Rena said, beginning to climb the stairs. But as they reached the second floor, something terrifying happened. The sound of heavy footsteps returned, this time from below. But it wasn't just one pair of feet. It sounded like dozens of people moving together, approaching quickly. "What is that?" Nunda cried, her voice nearly hysterical. Rena didn't answer. "Go faster." They ran up the stairs, but the footsteps kept getting closer. And just as they neared the fourth floor, Rena heard something that made her blood run cold. A long, piercing scream coming from above. From room 405. Their footsteps felt heavy as they finally reached the fourth floor. Their breaths were ragged, and the darkness here was even denser than before, as if the light from below was being deliberately blocked by something unseen. Rena shone her phone on the walls, searching for any sign that would lead them to room 405. The walls of the fourth floor were covered in scrawled writings. Some were strange symbols, while others were repeated phrases filled with desperation. Asterisk, they never sleep. Asterisk, asterisk, do not enter. Asterisk, asterisk, help me. Asterisk, what is this? Nenda whispered, her fingers trembling as she pointed to a strange symbol resembling a large eye scratched into the wall. "Who wrote all of this?" "It couldn't have been just regular patients," Aldo replied, trying to mask his fear. This looks like someone's final message." Rena remained silent, her eyes scanning the narrow hallway that felt unnaturally distorted. This corridor was different from the others. The walls were cracked, the floors were wet with a dark, odorless liquid, and every door they passed was broken, except one. At the end of the hallway stood a single intact door. It was large, made of metal, with a rusting number 405 above it. "There it is," Rena murmured. But something about the door made them all hesitate to approach. The air around it felt colder, and a faint humming sound could be heard, though its source was unclear. Fiend raised his camera, recording the door. "This is weird," he said quietly. "Why is this door still intact when all the others are destroyed?" "Because something is behind it," Aldo whispered. They all fell silent. Even the air around them seemed to hold its breath. Rena swallowed hard, gathering her courage. "We came here to find answers. We can't turn back now." With trembling hands, Rena grasped the door handle. The metal was ice cold. She took a deep breath, then slowly pushed the door open. A soft creaking sound filled the silence, like the cry of metal that hadn't moved in years. Darkness greeted them. Rena shone her phone's light into the room, revealing a vast, empty space. No furniture, no medical equipment, just bare concrete walls and a floor covered in dark, suspicious stains. But in the center of the room stood something that sent shivers down their spines. An old operating table, its restraints torn and worn out, and on top of it lay a small wooden doll, tied up with tangled ropes. "What is this?" Fiend asked, stepping closer while recording. Nenda gripped Rena's arm tightly. Her eyes locked onto the doll. This is strange. Really strange." Rena took a cautious step forward, inspecting the doll more closely. Its carved face was rough, but its eyes were wrong. They weren't painted. They were real. Two human eyeballs were embedded in its sockets, staring directly at them. And then, from behind them, the door slammed shut. Rena felt something strange in her body. It was as if an unseen force was pulling her into darkness. She felt weak, as if every muscle in her body had been drained by an unbearable fear. Her vision blurred, and her breathing grew heavier. "Rena!" Nenda shouted, his voice filled with panic. "Rena, don't fall." But Rena could no longer stand. Her legs trembled, and her body collapsed. Meanwhile, the dark shadow crept closer, and within the darkness, they all heard voices growing clearer, whispers echoing from an unfathomable depth. "Don't run." Rena felt as if the voice came from within her own head. Her eyes shut tightly, her body felt heavy, and the darkness surrounded her, slowly consuming her. Just as she was about to lose consciousness, she heard another sound. A scream, louder, deeper, and more terrifying than any human voice. It was the scream of something ancient, something older than the world itself, something that had long been asleep, now awakened. Suddenly, a blinding light burst from the staircase. Unlike the beams from their flashlights, this light shone brilliantly, illuminating everything. Along with it, the creature's shriek echoed through the air. The dark figures hesitated. Rena turned her head and saw an open door at the end of the corridor. It glowed with an eerie brilliance, beckoning them forward. Yet, deep inside, she sensed something was terribly wrong. If they stepped through that door, they might face a darkness far worse than the one behind them. But if they didn't, they would be trapped here forever. "Don't go in," Ninda screamed in terror. "It's a trap." Rena stood, sweat dripping from her forehead. "This is our only choice. If we don't, we'll die here." Summoning every last ounce of courage, she grabbed her friend's hands and sprinted toward the door. The monstrous entity roared behind them, its presence overwhelming. They ran as fast as they could, yet the door seemed to stretch farther away, as if the space itself twisted to keep them trapped. Finally, the door loomed before them, wide open, radiating an unearthly glow. But as they stepped inside, they realized the truth. The darkness awaiting them within might be far worse than anything they had ever imagined. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening thud, the sound echoing endlessly. The darkness beyond was suffocating, thicker than any night they had known. Even the light from their phones failed to penetrate it. The air inside was cold, heavy, pressing against their chests. Rena gripped Nunda's hand tightly, trying to steady herself, but the fear clawing at her mind was unbearable. "What is this place?" she whispered. "I don't know," Fiend murmured, his voice trembling. "But we have to find a way out." They moved cautiously, their footsteps swallowed by the eerie silence. In the darkness, they could hear only each other's breathing, ragged, fast. But amid those sounds, something else stirred. A faint creaking, like something shifting nearby. Rena turned sharply, searching for the source of the noise. But there was nothing, only the endless void. "What was that?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. "I don't know," Aldo replied, his face pale as he scanned the surroundings. "We need to keep moving." They pushed forward, and in the distance, a dim glow appeared. It wasn't natural light, but something distorted, flickering like an unnatural presence. As they approached, an invisible force seemed to pull them back, trying to keep them trapped in the darkness. At last, they entered a vast chamber filled with a strange light. Suspended in the center was a massive object, something like a chandelier, yet grotesquely different. It resembled an inverted human body, with light emanating from every part of it. The radiance shimmered like thousands of unblinking eyes, watching them intently. Rena shuddered. Every eye in the glowing structure moved, tracking her. The longer she stared, the more she felt her mind unraveling. "What now?" Fiend asked, his voice shaking. This isn't where we're supposed to be," Rena rasped. "We need to leave." But as they turned back, they realized the door was gone. There was no exit. "Where's the door?" Aldo shouted, his eyes wide with panic. It was right there. How did it disappear? Rena felt her strength draining. In this place, fear felt tangible, wrapping around them like a living entity. Something was watching, studying them. Every second stretched into eternity. Then, a deep, guttural sound rumbled through the chamber. A breathing so heavy, so unnatural, it shook the air itself. "Something is here," Ninda whispered, his eyes darting wildly. "What the hell is that?" Before they could react, a colossal shadow emerged from the darkness. Its form was undefined, shifting like living smoke, its glowing red eyes piercing through the void. Its mouth, if it could be called that, gaped open, revealing endless rows of jagged teeth. The rumbling intensified. The creature lunged. "Run!" Rena screamed, yanking her friends toward the wall, the only direction they could go. But as they neared it, the wall began to dissolve, morphing into a long, endless corridor. They ran, but no matter how far they went, the corridor never seemed to end. Every step pulled them deeper into the void. Then, from the far end of the passage, laughter rang out. Not human laughter, but something ancient, something that came from beyond time itself. The sound grew louder, shaking their very bones. They sprinted faster, desperate to escape, but the creature moved impossibly fast, distorting the space around it. "I can't do this anymore," Aldo screamed, his terror reaching its peak. "We're going to die here." Rena's mind blurred with panic. Her heart pounded, her legs burned. The laughter consumed her senses, a ceaseless nightmare whispering into her soul. Then, suddenly, a brilliant light exploded at the corridor's end. "There!" Fiend shouted, his voice trembling with hope. "That's our way out." They dashed toward the light, but before they could reach it, the creature materialized in front of them. Too fast, too massive, trapped. The laughter escalated, filling every inch of space. Reality itself seemed to warp around them. They were no longer in the abandoned hospital. They had entered a world far darker, a place where existence itself was a cruel joke. The creature's shadow loomed over them, stretching, expanding, consuming everything. Rena stood frozen, her breath shallow. She knew, deep in her soul, that they would never escape. Darkness wrapped around them, pulling them deeper. The last thing Rena saw was a red glow of the creature's eyes, burning like embers in the abyss. Then nothing. No sound, no light, just silence. An eternity of darkness awaited them.